As always, with the Duchess of Jargon saying nothing that makes any sense, unless, of course, you speak Californian psychobabble. Cutting through her deep space gobbledygook is always a struggle. Hard to ever know just exactly.
A packed London courtroom just exploded. Harry sat frozen, his world crumbling before his eyes. Meghan fled in tears as bombshell evidence emerged. What investigative legend Tom Bower revealed about her ex-husband Trevor will shake you to your core. Secret meetings, hidden timelines. A DNA scandal the palace buried. The fairy tale was a lie. Royal insiders are finally breaking their silence, and what they're saying about Archie changes everything.
The other side have used national security exclusions and excuses to withhold certain information from me, restrict me from being able to speak about certain things to the public. That this national security matter is not.
This testimony could end the Sussex brand forever. Are you ready for the truth they never wanted you to know? The Supreme Court in London has rarely seen anything quite like what unfolded in January 2026. While the building has witnessed countless high-profile cases over the years, the atmosphere surrounding this particular hearing was different. Journalists from around the world had gathered outside, cameras lined the streets, and crowds formed hours before the proceedings were scheduled to begin. This wasn't about a typical legal dispute or celebrity divorce. People had come because they sensed something significant was about to happen, something that might fundamentally change how we understand one of the most talked about couples in recent history. Inside courtroom number 7, the tension was almost tangible. Every seat was occupied, with international media representatives sitting shoulder to shoulder, notebooks ready, recording devices checked and double-checked. The usual murmur of conversation that fills a courtroom before proceedings begin was notably absent. Instead, there was an expectant silence, the kind that occurs when everyone present knows they're about to witness something important. When Tom Bower entered the courtroom, those familiar with investigative journalism immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Bower isn't a tabloid writer or someone who traffics in speculation and rumour. Over his decades-long career, he's built a reputation for meticulous research and verified evidence. His previous work has exposed corruption in business, politics, and media, and his subjects have learned that when Bower commits to an investigation, he doesn't proceed without substantial proof to support his claims. His books have detailed the inner workings of powerful institutions and the private dealings of individuals who thought themselves beyond scrutiny. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly as Bower prepared to deliver his testimony. Prince Harry sat in the spectator section, his posture rigid, wearing a dark suit that seemed to emphasize the seriousness of the occasion. Those who have followed Harry's public appearances over the years would have noticed something different in his demeanor. The prince, who has often appeared passionate and animated when discussing causes he cares about, seemed withdrawn. His expression was difficult to read, somewhere between apprehension and resignation. Beside him sat Meghan Markle, maintaining the composed exterior she's cultivated through years in the public eye. However, small details told a different story. Her hands gripped her handbag with noticeable force, and despite her outward calm, there was a visible tension in her shoulders. These subtle physical cues suggested that whatever was about to be discussed in this courtroom had significant personal implications for both of them. Bower's testimony began not with dramatic accusations or sensational claims, but with a methodical presentation of information. He spoke clearly and deliberately, his tone professional and measured. This wasn't about creating headlines or generating controversy for its own sake. Bower was presenting findings from what he described as an extensive investigation, one that had taken considerable time and had drawn on sources both inside and outside royal circles. The courtroom fell into complete silence when Bower mentioned the name Trevor Angleson. For those unfamiliar with Meghan's background, Angleson was her first husband, a film producer she had been married to for several years before their divorce in 2013. In the narrative that Harry and Meghan have shared publicly, that chapter of her life was presented as definitively closed, a previous relationship that ended amicably before she moved forward with her life and eventually met Harry. What made Bower's testimony particularly striking was his assertion that this wasn't the complete story. According to the evidence he claimed to possess, the relationship between Meghan and her former husband didn't end as cleanly as public accounts suggested. Bower referenced what he called documented evidence, including records and testimony from individuals who were in positions to observe interactions that weren't meant for public consumption. The phrase that sent a ripple through the courtroom was Operation Cuckoo. Bauer used this term to describe what he characterized as a coordinated effort to obscure certain facts about relationships and timelines. The term itself, loaded with historical and biological implications, suggested deception at a fundamental level. In nature, cuckoo birds are known for laying their eggs in other birds' nests, leaving unsuspecting foster parents to raise offspring that aren't genetically their own. The parallel Bauer was drawing was impossible to miss. When Bauer began discussing genetic testing and questions surrounding the parentage of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, the atmosphere in the courtroom became almost suffocating. This was no longer about past relationships or complicated personal histories. Bauer was raising questions about the biological lineage of a child who stands in the line of succession to the British throne. The implications were staggering, touching on constitutional matters, questions of legitimacy, and the very foundations of how royal succession is determined. Harry's reaction at this moment was described by those present as devastating to witness. His face reportedly lost colour, and he seemed to freeze in place. For a man who has spent years publicly defending his wife and children, who walked away from royal duties and fractured family relationships in the name of protecting his family, the weight of what was being suggested appeared to hit him with physical force. Whatever doubts or questions he might have privately harbored seemed to crystallize in that moment into something he could no longer ignore or dismiss. Meghan's response was equally telling, though dramatically different. Rather than remaining in her seat to hear the rest of Bauer's testimony, she stood abruptly. Witnesses described her as moving quickly toward the courtroom exit, tears visible on her face. The sound of the heavy wooden door closing behind her punctuated the moment, a physical manifestation of the emotional weight that had just been placed on the proceedings. Security personnel, caught off guard by her sudden departure, scrambled to follow protocol while respecting her obvious distress. The question that hung in the air, unspoken but present in everyone's mind, was simple yet profound. Why would a journalist of Tom Bauer's caliber, someone who has built an entire career on verified facts and defensible claims, choose this moment and this venue to make such explosive allegations? Bauer doesn't have a history of reckless accusations or unsubstantiated theories. His work has withstood legal challenges and scrutiny precisely because he exercises extreme caution about what he's willing to assert publicly. The timing of this testimony, coming years after Archie's birth and after Harry and Meghan had already stepped back from royal duties and relocated to California, raised additional questions about what had changed. What new information has come to light? What sources had decided after years of silence that the time had come to speak? And perhaps most significantly, what documentation did Bauer possess that gave him the confidence to make these claims, under oath in a court of law, where false testimony carries serious legal consequences? As the first session concluded and the courtroom began to empty, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer about media speculation or internet conspiracy theories. A respected investigative journalist had presented testimony that, if substantiated, would require serious examination, not just by the individuals involved, but potentially by constitutional scholars, Parliament, and the institutions that govern royal succession. The story that had begun as a modern fairy tale, a prince finding love with an American actress, had taken a turn that no one could have anticipated. To understand why Tom Bauer's testimony carried such weight in that London courtroom, it's important to understand who he is and how he operates. Bauer isn't someone who built his career on celebrity gossip or sensational headlines. He spent years as a lawyer before transitioning into journalism, working for the BBC and establishing himself as an investigative reporter who specialized in subjects that most journalists wouldn't touch. His targets over the decades have included media moguls, billionaire businessmen, and politicians who thought their power made them immune to scrutiny. What sets Bauer apart from other investigative journalists is his track record. When he publishes findings about someone, those findings typically hold up under legal challenge, which is why his subjects often choose silence over litigation. His 2022 book about Meghan Markle had already revealed details that contradicted the public narrative the Sussexes had carefully constructed, but what he presented in this courtroom went substantially further. Under cross-examination from Meghan's legal team, lawyers who are known for their aggressive defense tactics and high success rate, Bauer remained remarkably composed. He didn't become defensive or evasive. Instead, he asked the court clerk to display what he sounds, described as a comprehensive timeline on the courtroom's large screen. The timeline covered the period from 2013 to 2018, years that encompassed Meghan's divorce from Trevor, her rising career on the television series Suits, her meeting with Harry, and eventually their engagement and marriage. Bauer called this timeline the record of overlaps, a phrase that immediately suggested his investigation had found something that didn't align with the official story that had been told to the public. According to the narrative that Harry and Meghan have consistently promoted through interviews, documentaries, and public statements, Meghan emerged from her divorce as an independent woman. She focused on her acting career, became involved in humanitarian work, and eventually met Prince Harry in July 2016 through mutual friends. The story presented was one of clean breaks and new beginnings, with her past relationship fully concluded before her future with Harry began. Bauer's evidence painted a considerably different picture. He presented what he described as hotel records, verified telephone logs, and testimony from former staff members who had worked in various capacities during this period. These weren't anonymous sources making vague claims. Bauer indicated these were individuals whose employment records could be verified, people who had no obvious motivation to fabricate stories, and whose accounts corroborated each other in ways that suggested they were describing real events, rather than coordinating a false narrative. The evidence suggested that contact between Meghan and Trevor continued well beyond their 2013 divorce. This wasn't presented as occasional friendly communication between former spouses who had parted amicably. Instead, Bauer described a pattern of communication and meetings that continued even after Meghan's relationship with Harry had begun. The timeline Bauer presented showed what he characterized as unexplainable gaps in Meghan's schedule during the period when she was filming Suits in Toronto and simultaneously developing her relationship with Harry. These gaps in her schedule became particularly interesting when Bauer overlaid them with travel records. According to his investigation, Trevor made trips during these same periods, trips that weren't publicized and that seemed to have no clear professional purpose. The coincidence of these overlapping absences and travels, Bauer argued, was statistically unlikely to be random chance. What made this testimony particularly damaging wasn't just the suggestion of ongoing contact, but the implications for the timeline of Archie's conception. Bauer walked the court through the dates carefully, showing when Meghan and Harry's relationship became public, when they announced their engagement, when they married, and when Archie was born. He then posed questions about why certain events seemed rushed, why timelines that would typically unfold gradually were compressed into unusually short periods. The source of much of this information, according to Bauer, came from palace insiders. These weren't disgruntled former employees or people with obvious axes to grind. Bauer described them as long-serving members of the royal household, individuals who had dedicated their careers to the institution of the monarchy and who had maintained silence for years out of loyalty to the crown. The fact that such people had chosen to speak to Bauer suggested something significant had changed. These were individuals who understood the gravity of breaking centuries of protocol around royal privacy, yet they felt compelled to share what they had observed. Their decision to speak, Bauer suggested, wasn't motivated by malice toward Meghan or Harry personally. Rather, they felt that the truth of the situation had implications that went beyond personal relationships. When questions touch on issues of royal succession and the legitimacy of heirs to the throne, the stakes become constitutional rather than merely personal. Bauer directed the court's attention to several specific irregularities surrounding Archie's birth. Royal births traditionally follow certain protocols that have been established over generations. These aren't arbitrary customs, but procedures that serve to verify and document the legitimacy of heirs. When Archie was born at Portland Hospital in May 2019, several of these traditional procedures were not followed, and Bauer argued this deserved scrutiny. The most significant irregularity involved the doctors who attended the birth. Traditionally, senior members of the royal medical household sign the birth certificate, a practice that serves both ceremonial and legal purposes. In Archie's case, these signatures were notably absent. When questioned about this at the time, the explanation given was that Harry and Meghan wanted privacy and had chosen to handle things differently. While this explanation was accepted by most observers, At the time, Bauer suggested it takes on different significance when viewed alongside other irregularities. Additionally, Bauer highlighted the unusual decision to alter information on Archie's birth certificate several months after it was initially filed. Birth certificates are legal documents, and changes to them are relatively rare and typically require substantial justification. The specific changes made to Archie's certificate involved how his parents were identified on the document. While this was reported in the media at the time, it was generally portrayed as a minor administrative matter, perhaps reflecting Meghan's preference for how she was formally identified. Bauer suggested this change might have had more substantive motivations. The questions Bauer raised weren't presented as rhetorical devices meant to cast doubt without substance. He framed them as logical inquiries that deserved answers based on the evidence he had gathered. Why would a couple seeking privacy choose procedures that actually generated more questions and speculation than following traditional protocols would have? Why would established royal medical professionals refuse to participate in the birth in the traditional manner? What circumstances would motivate changes to a birth certificate months after the fact? Bauer's testimony also addressed Prince Harry's role in these events, though his approach was somewhat more sympathetic toward the prince. He portrayed Harry not as a co-conspirator, but as someone who may have been deceived. The evidence Bauer presented suggested Harry might have been operating with incomplete information about the relationships and timelines that preceded Archie's birth. This characterization of Harry as potentially unaware of the full truth added another layer of tragedy to the situation. According to Bauer's investigation, royal security forces had conducted their own monitoring of Meghan's relationships before the wedding. This wasn't unusual, he emphasized. Anyone marrying into the royal family undergoes background checks and security vetting. What was unusual, Bauer claimed, were the specific concerns that arose during this process. He stated that he had obtained copies of internal reports that flagged what security personnel described as concerning patterns in Meghan's communications and the presence of individuals from her past at times and places that seemed inconsistent with her public statements about having moved on from previous relationships. These reports, if they exist as Bauer claims, would have been provided to senior members of the royal family before the wedding. This raises uncomfortable questions about what was known, when it was known, and what decisions were made with that knowledge. Did Harry see these reports? If so, how were the concerns addressed? If not, why was he kept in the dark about information that directly concerned his future wife? The weight of Bauer's testimony came not from emotional appeals or dramatic presentation, but from the methodical accumulation of details that individually might be dismissed, but collectively formed a pattern that was difficult to ignore. He presented himself not as someone making accusations, but as someone laying out evidence and asking the questions that the evidence naturally prompted. Near the conclusion of this portion of his testimony, Bauer made a statement that resonated throughout the courtroom. He said that truth doesn't belong to anyone, it simply exists, and his responsibility as a journalist was to bring it out from wherever it had been hidden. This wasn't a claim of moral superiority, but rather a statement of professional obligation. In his view, when evidence suggests that the public has been misled about matters of constitutional significance, remaining silent becomes its own form of deception. One of the most significant revelations in Tom Bauer's testimony concerned what the palace itself knew and when they knew it. Many people assume that Buckingham Palace operates as a passive institution, reactive rather than proactive, waiting for scandals to unfold before responding. Bauer's investigation suggests this assumption is fundamentally incorrect, particularly when it comes to matters as serious as questions about royal bloodlines and succession. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who dedicated her entire life to preserving the integrity and continuity of the monarchy, certain principles were considered inviolable. The question of legitimate succession was among the most sacred of these principles. The monarchy's authority rests in large part on the concept of an unbroken bloodline stretching back through centuries. Any suggestion that this bloodline had been compromised would strike at the very foundation of the institution's legitimacy. According to Bauer's sources within the palace, the royal household was not naive about the questions surrounding Archie's birth. In fact, his testimony included a claim that many found shocking. He stated that immediately after Archie was born at Portland Hospital in May 2019, while the public was celebrating what appeared to be a joyous occasion for the Sussex family, a very different process was quietly unfolding behind the scenes at Buckingham Palace. Bauer described what he characterized as a routine health screening, though he made clear that this description was misleading. The actual purpose, according to his sources, was genetic testing designed to verify Archie's parentage. This wasn't done out of spite or suspicion directed personally at Meghan or Harry, but rather as a matter of constitutional necessity. When a child is born who potentially stands in line for the throne, verification of their bloodline isn't optional from the palace's perspective. It's a fundamental requirement for maintaining the integrity of the succession. The obvious question that arises is what happened to the results of this testing. If such tests were conducted, they would have provided definitive answers to the questions that Bauer was now raising in open court. Yet these results have never been made public, never been referenced in any official capacity, and according to Bauer's sources, have been sealed and stored in a highly secure location within the palace itself. Bauer claimed that the test results were placed in a special safe located deep within the palace's wine cellar, an area of the building where access is restricted to only the most senior members of the royal family. The choice of such a secure and isolated location suggests that whatever information these documents contain is considered extremely sensitive, too important and potentially damaging to be stored through normal archival procedures. This raises an obvious and troubling question. If the genetic testing confirmed that Archie carries royal blood and is indeed Harry's biological son, why would those results need to be locked away in one of the most secure locations in the palace? Positive results proving legitimate succession would seem to be something the palace would want accessible, even if not made public, to dispel any doubts that might arise. The decision to seal and hide these results suggests they might contain information that the palace determined was too dangerous to reveal. Bauer offered an explanation for this decision that was rooted in cold political calculation rather than compassion or family loyalty. He asked the court to consider the context of 2019 and what the royal family was already dealing with at that time. Prince Andrew was at the centre of an escalating scandal involving his relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The allegations against Andrew were dominating headlines and causing serious damage to the monarchy's reputation. Public opinion polls showed declining support for the royal family, and there were growing calls for reforms or even the abolition of the monarchy in some quarters. Into this already volatile situation, imagine adding another scandal, this one involving questions about the legitimacy of a child in the line of succession. If the genetic testing had revealed that Archie did not carry Windsor blood, the revelation would have created a constitutional crisis unlike anything the modern monarchy had faced. It would have meant that the public had been misled about a fundamental matter of royal succession. It would have raised questions about whether the deception was intentional or whether Harry himself had been unaware. It would have necessitated removing Archie from the line of succession and potentially triggered investigations into how such a situation could have occurred. King Charles, who was still Prince of Wales at the time, and Prince William faced what Bauer described as an impossible choice. They could reveal the truth, whatever it was, and risk the potential collapse of public confidence in the monarchy at a time when the institution was already under unprecedented pressure. Or they could choose strategic silence, protecting the monarchy's survival by containing information that might prove too damaging if released. According to Bauer's analysis, they chose silence. This decision, while perhaps understandable from the perspective of institutional self-preservation, created what he termed a protection shield for Meghan Markle. If the palace had decided it couldn't afford to reveal the truth about Archie's parentage, then Meghan operated from a position of considerable power. She would have understood that the palace was more afraid of the scandal being exposed than she was, which meant she could act without fear of the palace contradicting her public statements. This dynamic, Bauer suggested, explains much of what followed. The decision by Harry and Meghan to step back from royal duties in January 2020, their move to North America, and their subsequent willingness to give interviews and participate in documentaries that portrayed the royal family in highly negative terms. All of this occurred against the backdrop of the palace's decision to remain silent about what they knew regarding Archie. The palace's silence, rather than being an act of kindness or family loyalty, inadvertently became a weapon that could be used against them. Every time Harry and Meghan made public statements criticizing the royal family, the palace was limited in how it could respond because a full response might require revealing information they had decided must remain secret. This left them in the position of appearing cold, unresponsive, and unsympathetic, unable to defend themselves without potentially destroying the very institution they were trying to protect. Perhaps the most tragic figure in Bower's account is Prince Harry himself. Bower was careful to distinguish between Meghan's potential knowledge and actions and Harry's position. He portrayed Harry as someone who may have been operating without full information about the situation he found himself in. If the concerns about Archie's parentage were valid, Harry might have been completely unaware, believing himself to be a biological father while potentially being something quite different. Bower described Harry as trapped in what he called a glass cage of lies, visible to everyone but unable to see the barriers that constrain him. Harry has spent years fighting against the media, battling his own family and sacrificing his position within the royal hierarchy, all in the name of protecting his wife and children. He believed he was defending his family against unfair treatment and invasive scrutiny. But if Bower's investigation is accurate, Harry may have been defending a fiction, protecting a deception that he himself was not aware existed. The image Bower painted was of a man who trusted completely in the word of his wife, who accepted at face value the narrative he was given about timelines and relationships, and who never thought to question what he was being told. This wasn't presented as a criticism of Harry's intelligence, but rather as a recognition of how thoroughly someone can be deceived when they have no reason to doubt the person they love. The internal palace reports that Bower referenced, the ones supposedly compiled by security forces before the wedding, take on different significance in this context. If these reports contained warnings or raised concerns about Meghan's ongoing relationships with figures from her past, and if these reports were shown to senior royals but not to Harry himself, then the palace made a decision to allow the wedding to proceed, even while harbouring private doubts about the truth of the situation. This raises deeply uncomfortable questions about duty and family, about whether senior royals failed Harry by not sharing information that might have changed his decisions. Were they protecting the institution at the expense of one of their own? Or did they judge that the concerns were insufficient to justify interfering with Harry's happiness and his choice of spouse? The silence from both Buckingham Palace and from Meghan and Harry's representatives in the face of Bower's testimony is notable precisely because it represents such a departure from their usual patterns of behaviour. Meghan has historically been quick to pursue legal action against media outlets that publish information she considers false or invasive. She successfully sued a newspaper for publishing portions of a private letter to her father. She and Harry have filed numerous complaints and lawsuits over photographs and articles they deemed unfair. Yet, in response to Bower's testimony, which makes claims far more serious than anything previously published, there has been a notable absence of the aggressive legal response one might expect. A defamation lawsuit against Bower would seem like an obvious course of action if his claims were fabricated. The fact that no such lawsuit has materialized raises questions about why someone who has been so litigious in the past would choose not to pursue legal remedies in this instance. The most straightforward way to definitively disprove Bower's claims would be to provide DNA evidence through independent testing witnessed by neutral parties. This would immediately end all speculation and force Bower to either retract his statements or face serious legal consequences for false testimony. The absence of any move towards such testing suggests either that legal strategy prohibits it for reasons that aren't apparent, or that the results of such testing might not provide the vindication that a public denial would suggest they should. For those watching from outside, the silence becomes its own form of communication. When someone fails to deny an accusation in the way we would expect an innocent person to deny it, observers naturally begin to question why that expected denial hasn't materialized. The longer the silence continues, the more it begins to feel less like strategic, legal positioning and more like an inability to provide the simple, definitive proof that would end the controversy. The legal proceedings that began with Tom Bower's testimony represent just the opening chapter of what promises to be a lengthy and complex legal battle. Those familiar with the British court system understand that cases of this magnitude, particularly those involving constitutional questions and matters of royal succession, don't resolve quickly. Bower's initial testimony laid the foundation for what could become one of the most significant legal examinations of the monarchy in modern history. Sources close to the case have indicated that Bower's courtroom presentation represented only a portion of the evidence he claims to possess. Investigative journalists of his caliber typically hold back their most compelling evidence until it becomes legally or strategically necessary to reveal it. This suggests that additional documents, communications, or testimony may emerge as the proceedings continue. The question of what Bauer still has in reserve adds an element of uncertainty to an already volatile situation. One particularly interesting possibility is whether Trevor Angelson himself might be called to testify. Angelson has maintained a low profile since his divorce from Meghan, rarely speaking to the media and generally avoiding involvement in the ongoing saga of the Sussexes. However, if subpoenaed by a court, he would be legally obligated to provide testimony under oath. His first-hand knowledge of the timeline in question, his relationship with Meghan during the critical period, and any communications that occurred after their divorce officially ended could all become matters of legal record. The legal team representing Meghan and Harry faces a situation with no easy solutions. If they choose to file a defamation lawsuit against Bauer, they open themselves to the discovery process. In civil litigation, both parties have the right to request evidence from each other, compel testimony, and examine documents that might support or refute the claims being made. This means that pursuing legal action against Bauer could result in being legally required to provide exactly the kind of evidence, including DNA testing and communication records, that they have so far declined to make public. Conversely, if they continue to remain silent and decline to pursue legal action, Bauer's allegations remain unchallenged in the official record. With each passing day that no defamation suit is filed, his claims gain a degree of credibility simply by virtue of not being contested through legal channels. The absence of a vigorous legal defense becomes its own form of evidence in the court of public opinion. Buckingham Palace finds itself in an equally precarious position. The institution operates under different constraints than private individuals. As representatives of the Crown and stewards of a centuries-old institution, palace officials must consider not just the immediate legal implications of their actions, but the long-term consequences for the monarchy itself. If they were to confirm Bauer's claims, they would be admitting to years of concealing information about fraud in the line of succession. Such an admission could trigger demands for parliamentary investigations, calls for reform, and serious questions about whether an institution capable of such deception deserves to continue receiving public funding and support. If the palace chooses to deny Bauer's allegations without providing substantive proof, they risk the journalist releasing additional evidence that would make their denial appear to be yet another layer of deception. The palace's credibility has already been tested by various scandals in recent years, and being caught in what would be perceived as a deliberate lie about matters of constitutional significance could prove devastating. There is also the question of what Parliament's role might be in these proceedings. If the allegations touch on matters of succession and the legitimacy of an heir, members of Parliament may conclude that they have a constitutional obligation to investigate regardless of what the royal family prefers. Parliamentary inquiries have the power to subpoena witnesses, demand documentation, and compel testimony under oath. Such an investigation would be unprecedented in modern times, but the circumstances Bauer has described might leave lawmakers with little choice but to examine the matter formally. Constitutional experts have already begun weighing in on the potential implications. If Archie were determined not to carry royal blood, the process of removing him from the line of succession would require careful legal work. It's not simply a matter of crossing a name off a list. The line of succession is governed by legislation that has evolved over centuries, and any changes would need to follow established legal procedures. Additionally, there would be questions about what explanation would be provided to the public for such a change, and whether those explanations would need to include details about the circumstances that led to the decision. For Prince Harry, the psychological implications of this situation are almost impossible to comprehend. Every interaction he's had with Archie since his birth, every moment of joy and pride in fatherhood, would be re-examined through the lens of potential deception. Photographs that were meant to capture happy family moments would take on different meanings. Public statements he made defending his family and explaining his decisions would need to be reconsidered in light of the possibility that his understanding of the situation was fundamentally incomplete or incorrect. The man who walked away from his position as a senior working royal, who damaged his relationships with his father and brother, who moved his family across the ocean to escape what he described as an intolerable situation, may discover that the very thing he was trying to protect wasn't what he believed it to be. The psychological damage from such a revelation would extend far beyond hurt feelings or wounded pride. It would constitute a fundamental betrayal that would reshape his understanding of his own life story. Then there is Archie himself, an innocent child who had no role in creating any of the circumstances now being debated in courtrooms and discussed in media around the world. If the allegations prove true, he would eventually need to be told that his understanding of his own identity, his place in his family, and his connection to the royal lineage were all based on false information. The impact of such a revelation on a child's development and sense of self is difficult to calculate, but undoubtedly profound. Child psychologists who have commented on similar situations in other contexts note that discovering fundamental deceptions about one's parentage can lead to long-term struggles with trust, identity, and self-worth. Even in cases where the child is loved and well cared for, learning that their origin story was not what they had been told creates a rupture in their sense of continuity and belonging. The media coverage of this situation has been extensive and shows no signs of diminishing. British tabloids in particular have devoted substantial resources to following every development, interviewing anyone willing to comment, and speculating about what might happen next. For an industry that has faced criticism about its treatment of royal family members, particularly in the wake of Princess Diana's death, this story represents both an opportunity and a test of whether lessons about responsible reporting have been learned. International media has also given the story prominent coverage, recognizing that questions about the British monarchy resonate far beyond the United Kingdom itself. The royal family remains a subject of fascination around the world, and any suggestion of scandal or deception involving such a prominent institution naturally attracts global attention. Looking forward, several possible scenarios could unfold. The legal proceedings could result in a court-ordered DNA test, which would provide definitive answers to the questions Bauer has raised. The palace could choose to release whatever documentation they possess, deciding that transparency serves the institution's interests better than continued secrecy. Meghan and Harry could break their silence with their own evidence and testimony that refutes Bauer's claims. Or the situation could remain unresolved, with competing narratives and unanswered questions continuing to swirl around the family indefinitely. What seems increasingly unlikely is that the story will simply fade away. The questions raised are too significant, the implications too serious, and the public interest too intense for this to be swept aside without resolution. Whether that resolution comes through legal proceedings, voluntary disclosure, or investigative journalism remains to be seen. But the pressure for answers will likely continue to build until some form of clarity emerges.